After the birth of their child, my son and his wife hadn't contacted me, so I decided to visit their home out of concern. When I discovered the door was unlocked, I was shocked and rushed in, only to be overwhelmed by a strange smell that made me cover my nose with both hands. The room was filled with garbage, and the foul odor made it clear that this wasn't a normal situation. From somewhere in that cluttered room, I heard a baby's cry. Desperately, I called out my daughter-in-law Aretha's name and stepped further inside. Finally, I found her, and the sight made me scream. There she was, a crying baby in her arms, and Aretha herself was frighteningly thin. Recognizing me, Aretha moved her chapped lips.
"Susie, this is Annalise. I finally get to introduce you."
I held back my tears as best as I could. With weak arms, she showed me the baby named Annalise, and I gave her a gentle smile. "Aretha, you should get some rest. I'll take care of Annalise."
"What, Susie?"
What she said next left me speechless. I'm Susie, 46 years old. I live alone in an apartment in the city. I have one son, but we live separately. I divorced my husband, Ash, about 15 years ago. He was always fond of nightlife, and I knew that when I married him. I thought it was just a phase, something cute that he would grow out of once we had a family. But even after a few years of marriage and the birth of our son Elvis, Ash continued his excessive nightlife, which caused me a lot of distress. He was rarely home and always smelled of alcohol. When he did come home, he would often, in his drunken state, pick up our young son Elvis roughly, making me constantly worried. Naturally, he was not involved in parenting, so I took care of Elvis on my own. With him spending on drinking and gambling, our expenses piled up, and I had to work while leaving Elvis at daycare. I grew weary of this life and repeatedly warned Ash, but he never listened. When I pressed the issue, he would yell and raise his fist. One night, after losing at gambling, he became so irritated by Elvis's crying that he almost hit him. That was the last straw for me. I handed him the divorce papers and left the house with Elvis and a few belongings. From then on, I worked tirelessly to raise Elvis properly. Both my parents had passed away early, so I had no one to rely on. In addition to my regular job, I took on part-time work on weekends to make ends meet. It was physically and emotionally exhausting, but I kept telling myself that this was the path I chose and I couldn't let Elvis suffer because of it. Even though I felt guilty for leaving Elvis at daycare all day, I made sure to shower him with love whenever we were home together. On rare days off, we would go to the park for picnics, enjoying peaceful days even though our family situation was different. However, things started to take a turn for the worse when Elvis entered middle school. He had always been a bit mischievous, but he started hanging out with some bad influences, and his language and behavior began to deteriorate. He started coming home in the early hours of the morning, and while I had my suspicions about what he was up to, I couldn't bring myself to confront him. I felt guilty for taking Ash away from him and making him feel lonely when he was young. When he was finally caught riding a motorcycle without a license, I was beside myself with worry, but all I could do was give him the usual scolding. Naturally, he didn't take it to heart, and his behavior only got worse. He managed to get into high school, but he dropped out soon after. Finding a job for someone with no high school diploma and a record of bad behavior wasn't easy, but I couldn't just abandon my son to the streets. I pleaded with the manager of a construction company where I had some connections, and Elvis was given a job there. His work ethic was far from ideal, but due to a shortage of staff, the company kept him on until he turned 20. However, his boss mentioned with a wry smile that Elvis spent all his paychecks on beer and gambling, and I sighed deeply. I felt like a failure as a mother, unable to guide or even reach my son who was heading down a bad path. But I no longer knew how to relate to him. One day, as I was cleaning, the doorbell rang. I wondered if I was expecting a package as I walked to the door. When I opened it, I couldn't help but let out a gasp of surprise. There stood Elvis, whom I hadn't seen in years, with a petite girl with shoulder-length black hair beside him. As I stood there in shock, the girl bowed deeply. "Nice to meet you. My name is Aretha." The girl, who introduced herself as Aretha, was clearly younger than Elvis, still showing traces of youth. Still bewildered, I invited them into the house. In the living room, Aretha began to speak, and what she said nearly made me faint from shock for the second time that day. According to her, Elvis had been living in her apartment for some time. I knew he had been couch surfing, but I never imagined he had ended up staying with a girl younger than himself. I couldn't suppress a sigh at the thought. But the real shock was yet to come. Aretha revealed that she was pregnant with twins. She was wearing loose clothing, so I hadn't noticed, but her belly was already quite prominent. The purpose of their visit was to inform me of this. Apparently, Elvis had said, "Telling my mom is nonsense." But Aretha had insisted on coming to see me. Holding my throbbing head, "Should I come with you to meet your parents?" I asked Aretha. I couldn't imagine Elvis handling such a task on his own. But Aretha, with a troubled look, shook her head. "I grew up in foster care. I don't know my parents." I was shocked, realizing she had no support system. In a panic, "How far along are you?" I asked. But she just tilted her head in confusion. My anxiety increased. I tried another question. "What did the doctor say?" Aretha replied, "I haven't been to a doctor. I haven't even caught a cold." I cautiously asked, "Haven't you seen an OBGYN?" Aretha nodded. I almost fainted again, but managed to stay on my feet. Quickly looking up the nearest OBGYN on my phone. There was an obstetrician within walking distance that was still accepting patients, so I told Aretha about it and took her hand, suggesting we go together right away. Aretha, though puzzled, nodded and stood up from her chair. Then, dutifully, she informed Elvis, who had long since disengaged from the conversation and was engrossed in his game, that we were heading out, and followed behind me. He didn't even look up from his game screen. So, we arrived at the obstetrician's office. After about 30 minutes of examination, the doctor mentioned that Aretha was around 6 months pregnant. I listened intently to the doctor's voice as they explained the precautions and advice. Maybe influenced by my seriousness, Aretha nodded frequently as she listened to the conversation. After leaving the obstetrician's office, we went straight to the city hall to get her maternity handbook. While I was handling the paperwork, Aretha, following my instructions to stay still, held the handbook with a look of awe in her eyes. Aretha thanked me repeatedly, and I took the opportunity to ask something that had been on my mind for a while. "Why are you with Elvis, Aretha? You're such a good person, but Elvis is not exactly a good guy, is he?" Aretha laughed shyly and replied, "When he came to the auto body shop where I worked, Elvis told me I was cute. That's when I fell in love with him." Seeing her touch her blushing cheeks and smile, I felt a pang of concern. She seemed very innocent, almost naive in a way. In contrast, Elvis didn't appear to be the type to support or compensate for her shortcomings. But he decided to keep his thoughts to himself and just smiled quietly, not wanting to burden a pregnant woman. Then, with genuine feeling, he said, "If you ever need anything, or even if you don't, feel free to reach out anytime." Aretha's eyes widened in surprise, and then tears began to fall from her big eyes. I laughed and hugged Aretha. From that day on, "Susie," she started calling me. Aretha and I would occasionally meet up to go shopping or have tea together. She had been working at a body shop after leaving the facility, but she was on leave due to severe morning sickness. She mentioned that Elvis was contributing some money, which was a relief. Still, it was clear they weren't living comfortably, and I often ended up buying maternity items that were quite expensive. Whenever Aretha hesitated and seemed apologetic, "I'm just excited about having a grandchild. Please don't worry," I would always say. Aretha would then smile happily and gently stroke her belly. In fact, I was very happy with the current situation, having someone like a daughter and expecting a grandchild. I had my reservations about Elvis doing nothing, but I tried not to dwell on it. I never imagined it would lead to an irreversible situation later. As Aretha's due date approached, I threw my back out at my part-time job. I reassured a worried Aretha over the phone and managed to spend about a week at home, but the pain wouldn't subside. When I finally went to the hospital, they advised hospitalization since I lived alone, even though surgery wasn't necessary. Having reached my limit enduring the pain alone, I agreed to their suggestion. So, I spent nearly a month bedridden, waiting for the pain to ease. Even during those painful, bedridden days, I was deeply concerned about. It's still about Aretha. I had planned to be there for her delivery, but that was now impossible, and I couldn't take her out for fresh air anymore. I was constantly frustrated with my body not cooperating, feeling restless and helpless. One day, I received a notification of a message that made me forget my back pain and leap up. It was from Aretha, saying she had given birth safely, and both she and the baby were healthy. Tears of joy streamed down my face as I replied. Since we were both in the hospital, it was hard to talk on the phone, but her cheerful message made me very happy. However, from that day on, I suddenly stopped hearing from her. Naturally, there was no word from Elvis, and I couldn't reach them no matter how hard I tried. Worried sick, I headed straight to her apartment after my discharge. I walked to her room, a familiar path, and rang the doorbell. But no one answered, and my expression grew more and more anxious. I rang the doorbell again, but still no response. I reached for the doorknob, muttering in shock,
"It's open."
I quickly opened the door and rushed inside. But I immediately stopped and covered my nose with both hands. A strong, foul odor permeated the room. Just from looking around the entrance, it was clear that the house was far from normal, with an unusual amount of trash everywhere. And above all, the piercing cry of the baby. Desperately, I called out Aretha's name and stepped into the room. Finally, I spotted her, and I screamed. There she was, a crying baby and a gaunt Aretha. Her arms, holding the baby, were so thin they seemed barely capable of supporting the child. Her cheeks were hollow, and the once youthful and cute her was unrecognizable. I rushed to her side, nearly tripping in my haste. Aretha acknowledged me, her chapped lips moving slightly.
"Susie, this is Annalise. I finally got to introduce you."
I held back my tears that threatened to overflow. With a weak arm, she showed me the child named Annalise, and I smiled gently at her. "Thank you for letting me meet Annalise. I'll take care of Annalise. Why don't you eat something?" "I brought a lot of food," I said, taking Annalise from her. Annalise, unlike Aretha, looked very healthy. Aretha, hearing my words, stood up unsteadily. She was so shaky that I hurriedly stopped her. "Aretha, I think you need to get some sleep first. You have dark circles under your eyes." To my surprise, Aretha looked shocked. She then said to me, "Is it okay for a mother to sleep?" I was at a loss for words. For now, I had Aretha hold Annalise once more, laid out a futon, then took Annalise back and guided Aretha to the bedding. Annalise looked up at me quietly. "Good girl," I cooed, soothing Annalise. Once Aretha was lying down quietly, I asked her, "Did someone tell you that mothers can't sleep?" Aretha responded, "Elvis said that raising a child means a mother must sacrifice her sleep," she said, her shoulders drooping in defeat. She was depressed because she couldn't live up to what Elvis said. Suppressing my anger toward Elvis. "Where is Elvis now?" I asked. Aretha replied, "Probably at the casino. He's always there." Uncertainly. I wanted to curse myself for lying idly in the hospital until yesterday. A swirl of emotions rose within me, but for now, I kept my face composed, knowing she needed rest. Just as I was about to tell her to rest, I heard the front door open with a clatter. "Hey, I'm home." Elvis stormed into the room with heavy footsteps. At the same moment, Annalise in my arms began to wail loudly. Elvis's angry voice approached. "Hey! Shut that kid up! Make her stop crying!" Aretha's face turned fearful at the sound of his voice, and she started to get up. I restrained her with one hand and handed Annalise to her. Then, I faced Elvis, who barged into the room, still yelling. Elvis, not expecting to see me there, was momentarily taken aback. But he quickly recovered, scowling at me with raised eyebrows. His face overlapped with the image of my former husband. I clenched my fist tightly. I never want to regret it again. I opened my clenched fist and swung it wide. A loud slap echoed through the room. Elvis stood there, holding his slapped cheek, stunned. It was the first time I had ever raised my hand against him. He probably never imagined being hit by me. Still in shock, I snapped at Elvis. "You're the worst. Babies need constant care, 24/7. And you just left everything to Aretha. What's wrong with that? My mom raised me alone. I don't need to do anything." Hearing Elvis say that left me stunned. I never showed Elvis my weaknesses, never complained or whined in front of him. Sure, I was cutting into my sleep time, and Elvis must have sensed that, even when he was little. But this is the result. A single tear slid down my cheek. Elvis looked shocked. I see, this was the first time he'd ever seen me cry. I gathered all my strength to keep my voice from trembling and began to speak. "We're all human, Elvis, me, Aretha, even your mother. We all have our breaking points. I couldn't have raised you alone. I relied on the help of neighbors and daycare staff to get by." Even if he was young, he must remember the daycare and the kind neighbors who were good to him. Elvis mumbled. "Just because I went through it doesn't mean Aretha should have to. We're different people." I heard Aretha's soft sobs from behind me. I looked Elvis straight in the eyes, choosing my words carefully. There are people who can't raise their children due to various circumstances. And in those cases, it's always the mothers who get arrested. The mothers are the ones held responsible. Doesn't that seem wrong to you? I asked Elvis. I spoke slowly and carefully, hoping my words would reach my son. "Why should only the mother bear the responsibility for the children we both brought into this world? You, as a father, have equal responsibility. You need to find a way to fulfill your obligations." With that, I turned and asked Aretha if she could stand. I wanted to let her rest, but it wasn't safe for her and Annalise to stay in that room any longer. Aretha wiped her tears and nodded, so I picked up Annalise and led her out of the room. Elvis was still frozen in place. We went back to my apartment. "You can live here from now on. We can buy whatever you need. You don't have to go back to that room." Aretha gave a small nod. Later, Aretha told me that since Annalise was born, Elvis had stopped contributing his paycheck to the household. Instead, He spent his nights out with friends and gambling. Not only that, but he had also made Aretha co-sign for numerous loans, piling up debt after debt. Even though he was my own flesh and blood, I couldn't ignore his actions any longer. I decided to report him to the police for abandoning Annalise. The police told me that if it was true, he would likely be arrested for neglecting his duties as a guardian. Elvis must have realized the gravity of the situation when the police came to question him. He tried to call me, but I didn't answer. I also went to see his boss in person. I explained the situation and asked him to. I spoiled him. Please treat him as the adult he is and hold him accountable. I bowed my head slightly. The CEO nodded sternly. In the end, he was immediately fired from the construction company. And finally, a few days later, he was arrested by the police. It's still unclear whether he will be prosecuted or not, but I hope he fully realizes the gravity of what he has done. Aretha began living with Annalise and me, gradually regaining her health. I explained to Aretha that raising a child is not something one should struggle with alone and that mothers also need to rest. We talked about how we would raise Annalise together, ensuring her happiness. Today, Aretha and Annalise are running around the park with smiles so bright they could light up the sky. Annalise, with her short legs, toddles toward the sandbox. Aretha's gentle expression as she watches is illuminated by the warm sunlight. As I observe this heartwarming scene, I reflect on my own role as a parent. I had kept turning a blind eye because I didn't know how to engage, and this led to the current outcome. What does it mean to be responsible as a parent? What is a parent's role? As I ponder these questions, I also begin to feel respect and gratitude for my parents, who raised me. My parents were kind, but also corrected me when necessary. I now think that I need to face Elvis properly once more in the future. For now, I plan to visit my parents' grave to express my gratitude and inform them about the new family I've found. Engaging in physical intimacy here feels great, doesn't it? Yeah. But Mary really is oblivious, isn't she? Totally. To think she hasn't realized what's going on between her husband and her sister. Laughter from the two of them followed. I stood in front of the room, fists clenched. I wanted to burst in and confront them, both naked. While I was thinking this, my sister Emma's voice gradually faded. It gradually turned into a whisper between them, and before long, her sweet voice echoed. I had reached my limit of patience. What are you doing in my bed? A rage I couldn't vocalize rose within me, and I quietly left the area to avoid making noise. Maybe I am dense. But I had a hunch about my husband's infidelity. I was afraid to acknowledge that he was cheating, so I did nothing. But being presented with undeniable proof woke me up. They shouldn't be forgiven. If I ran away now, it would stay this way forever. I didn't want to be looked down upon by anyone anymore. I decided to take revenge on them for myself. Thinking this, I quietly entered the living room. My name is Mary. I'm 27 and a preschool teacher. It's a tough job, but I've always dreamed of doing it and don't plan to quit. However, my husband Tom wants me to quit my job. The reason being, it's embarrassing, apparently. Since I'm earning, there's no need for you to work. He works at a food processing company owned by my father. He's a university graduate and a rising star in the company. Yet, he's embarrassed that his wife works and fears being mocked by his college friends. That seems to be his thought. Ironically, my sister Emma has said the same thing. But in her case, it felt more derogatory. Clumsy working as a preschool teacher? That's laughable. You better quit soon. Complaints from my husband and condescension from my sister. That's my daily life now. But being looked down upon by Emma isn't new. Emma, with her elegant features like our mother, has always looked down on me, who is average looking. You really have nothing going for you. Below average in looks, and not a hint of dexterity. That's not true. What? Don't you dare talk back to me. Just listen quietly to what I have to say. How many times we've had this conversation. And similar things were said by those around us. Emma is beautiful like Mom. You two don't look much alike, do they? That's what I'd always hear, wherever I went. While it's true that she has elegant features, it's not like I'm unattractive. I just take after our father. I wanted to retort that, but my inability to speak well prevented me from doing so. In the end, she was always the one everyone doted on. Even my mother favored Emma, who resembled her. There's a clear incident that shows this. It happened when I was in elementary school. One holiday, while Dad was out at the convenience store, Mom said to Emma, "Emma, shall we go buy some clothes?" "Really? Yay!" Emma was thrilled. I hesitated for a moment, hoping, but when Mom looked at me, she said with a cold gaze, "You don't need clothes, do you, Mary?" I averted my gaze hesitantly. Then, Mom looked at me sharply. "You don't need them, right?" "Yes." "Oh, that's too bad. Since Mary doesn't need any, we'll go just the two of us." And so, Mom left with Emma, leaving me to stay home alone. Soon after, Dad came home. Surprised, he asked why I was alone. Mom and Emma went to buy clothes. I nearly burst into tears. Seeing my state, Dad immediately understood. He had probably sensed that Mom favored Emma. Dad confronted Mom when she returned. And Mom began to cry and make excuses. Mary said she didn't need any. She was just being considerate. You should know that.
I don't understand what you are talking about.
Mom retorted sharply. Dad was disappointed with her attitude. Mary, next time, let's go out together, okay? Yeah. Since that day, Dad has always been more attentive towards me. However, Mom's attitude remained unchanged. She always favored Emma. Honestly, I had given up. But it seemed my father hadn't. One day, he brought a woman home. She was a relative named Kate. Kate was supposed to live alone as she entered college, but our relatives were worried, so my father took her in. Nice to meet you, Mary. Yeah. The idea was, with a relative in the house, my mother couldn't ignore me as easily. I later found out that was my father's intention. With Kate's arrival, my mother and Emma's attitudes visibly changed. Whenever Emma made a snide remark to me, Kate would scold her. Emma, it's not nice to say that to Mary. You're a good girl, Emma, you understand, right? Emma would sulk at her words. She was displeased but seemed unable to voice her complaints directly. My mother was the same. She was pointed out whenever something happened. For example, when my mother prepared snacks only for Emma, Kate said, "Oh, snacks just for her?"
No.
Mary's is coming up next, right? My mother grimaced at Kate's words. She couldn't say there wasn't any for me. If she did, it might get back to my father through Kate. Fearing that, my mother reluctantly said,
Yes, of course. I'm about to prepare it now. Just wait a moment, Mary.
Reluctantly, my mother opened the fridge and placed a snack in front of me, just like hers. That's how Kate saved me many times. I often thought it would have been nice if she was my real sister. I was 10 years old at the time and thought so many times. She was 8 years older, a bit of an age gap. But in my heart, Kate had become my sister. And that feeling only grew stronger. Eventually, I couldn't hold back and confided in Kate. "Hey, Kate. Can I think of you as my real sister from now on?" "Of course," she said with a smile. But this angered my mother. "You're deceiving Mary, aren't you?" "Huh? What do you mean?" "Telling Mary she can think of you as her real sister. What are you after?" My mother confronted Kate harshly. Of course, Kate had nothing to feel guilty about. She responded calmly to my mother. But the situation turned when my mother said, "Kate, you're having an affair with my husband." "What? That's not true at all. Don't lie. You're Joe's mistress. That's why you, trying to make Mary your own daughter." My mother berated Kate. And her voice was loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Of course, there was no truth to my father having an affair with Kate. But it did affect how we were seen by those around us. Indeed, rumors spread in the neighborhood that Kate was my father's mistress. Reluctantly, my father had to send her away from our home. Once Kate left, everything quickly went back to how it was. But there was one change. My parents' relationship worsened. "Bringing a mistress into our home is the lowest of the low. I've told you many times, Kate is. She's a relative, right? I'm tired of that excuse." My mother turned away. My father seemed at a loss. With her gone, the hostility towards me intensified. Unable to bear it, I decided to leave home as soon as I graduated high school. After that, I worked part-time jobs while attending community college and then obtained my preschool teaching certificate. Even after becoming a preschool teacher, I continued to stay away from home. Going home meant facing snide remarks from my mother and Emma. I was concerned about my family's company. But with Emma there, it shouldn't be a problem. Feeling bad for my father, I told him this over the phone. He simply said he understood. It seemed he understood my feelings. Relieved, I devoted myself to my job as a preschool teacher. Years passed, and then one day, I received a call from my father. "Mary, do you have someone you're thinking of marrying?" "What's this all of a sudden, Dad?"
Well, actually,
My father's story went like this. Not long ago, he went for an annual physical examination. Though he wasn't found to have any illness, a relative who went with him was diagnosed with something. That's when my father thought about the need for a successor for his company. The company needs a successor. My father's company was started by my grandfather. Furthermore, it grew to its current size with the help of relatives. However, it's not a family business. It's just that it has been supported by relatives. Meaning, if something happens to my father, someone must take over the company. Naturally, there are options for a capable person to become the president, but my father wants his own child to inherit it.
so marriage, huh?
Emma can't be trusted, but how about you, Mary? With one of our capable employees? My father's voice sounded unusually serious. He seems quite concerned about the annual physical examination.
Then I'll just meet him, that's all.
Okay, then the schedule is. It seemed my father had already decided on a schedule. Eventually, I agreed to meet someone from the company as my father suggested. I thought I'd just meet him and then find a way to decline politely. But my plans were thwarted because my mother started pushing for the marriage. For some reason, my mother encouraged me to get married. This is a good opportunity for the introverted Mary. There's no reason to refuse, is there? But, do you have someone else in mind? I had no choice but to remain silent at my mother's questioning. Unable to refuse, I ended up dating him. I'm sorry. My mom is quite pushy. No, I'm more than happy to be with a beauty like you, said Tom, the man I was introduced to, with a smile. I returned a forced smile. He's kind, and according to my father, he's a fast-rising star in the company. I'm not sure, but is this what marriage is like? People around me always praised Emma, so I was hardly ever complimented myself. But he called me beautiful. Even if it was just flattery, I might not meet someone like him again in the future. So, I thought maybe I could marry him. And I married Tom. We started living together at my parents' house, as my father wished. I didn't like it, but Emma was living alone. I only had to endure my mother. So, I thought. But I soon regretted my naive judgment. As soon as we got married, Tom's attitude changed drastically. Quit your job as a preschool teacher. Why? I love my job. I'm going to succeed and become the president. It's embarrassing for the wife of a future president to work. His tone was gentle, but what he said was quite harsh. Don't work like a poor person. Act like a wealthy one. I felt like I could see through Tom's unspoken feelings. My affection for him quickly cooled. Within a few years, I felt nothing for him. That's why our marriage was full of misunderstandings. Now, we just think of each other as roommates. Even though we're only technically a married couple, I can't let Tom do as he pleases. On the other hand, if he's cheating somewhere, I wish he would just do it. If I could catch him cheating, I could end this relationship immediately.
But thinking this way might mean I've completely lost any affection for him.
Even though I think this, I'm afraid to make it clear. I was caught between these conflicting feelings. In fact, he would sneak out occasionally. If I investigated his behavior, I'm sure I'd catch him. Yet, I did nothing. On a certain holiday, I decided to go out in the morning to buy things for the child care center's play. I'll be back by the evening. What about your dad and mom? Dad's working on his day off. Mom went out shopping with a friend. I was sure because I saw them off. When I said that, he nodded reluctantly. So, it's just me then. That's right. Take care of the house, please. Yeah. Tom said reluctantly, scratching his head as he went back to his room. I left the house, wondering if it was okay. I headed to the nearby dollar store. First, I filled my basket with the necessary items while looking at the notes on my smartphone. After I finished shopping, I casually put my hand in my pocket. That's when I realized. The wallet that was supposed to be there was missing. Wait, my wallet? Did I drop it? I stopped myself as I realized. I had left it on the living room table. Thinking I made a mistake, I put the items back and hurried home. As I unlocked the front door, strange voices could be heard from inside. It seemed like a woman's voice. Wait. The only one home should be Tom, right? I headed towards the source of the voices. It was our bedroom. Why from the bedroom? I wondered as the woman's voice became clearer. Mary isn't coming back until the evening? I immediately covered my mouth, realizing it was Emma's voice. Tom's voice followed. She went to buy things for the play. Then we have until the evening to enjoy ourselves. If you look closely, you'll see that the door is slightly open. Peering through the slightly ajar door, I saw Emma and Tom inside. The two of them were on the bed, not wearing any clothes. Tom and Emma were having an affair. As I came to that realization, he said, "Engaging in physical intimacy here is quite something, isn't it?" Indeed. But Mary is really oblivious, isn't she? Absolutely. She still hasn't realized what's going on between her husband and her sister. Their laughter followed. I stood in front of the room, fists clenched. I wanted to burst in and confront them, both naked. As I thought this, Emma's voice gradually faded. It turned into whispers, and soon her sweet voice filled the air. I had reached my limit of patience. "What are you doing in my bed?" A rage I couldn't vocalize rose within me. And I quietly left the area to avoid making noise. Maybe I am dense, but I had a hunch about his infidelity. I was afraid to acknowledge he was cheating, so I did nothing. But being presented with undeniable proof woke me up. Tom and the detestable Emma shouldn't be forgiven. If I ran away now, it would stay this way forever. I didn't want to be looked down upon by anyone anymore. I decided to take revenge on them for myself. Thinking this, I quietly entered the living room. The family computer was in the living room. I really wanted to use my own computer. But my computer was in the bedroom. Since Tom and Emma were there, I couldn't go inside.
I can do at least this much,
I murmured as I took the webcam in my hand. With it, I went up to the bedroom door and pointed the camera inside through the gap, then hurried back to the living room. I turned on the computer and connected it to the webcam wirelessly. At the same time, I sent a message to someone. Then, like a web conference, I streamed the camera footage to that person. "Can you see it?" I asked using the computer's microphone. An immediate response came back. "I can see it, perfectly." The reply came from Kate. Yes, I had contacted her. After Kate left the house, I felt quite lonely and depressed. Seeing this, my father set up a computer so I could keep in touch with her. Since then, I frequently communicated with her. It was like having a web conference, as my father put it. In any case, connecting with her was easy.
Emma and Tom are in the midst of an affair. Kate, can I live stream this?
Of course. I'll record it for you, too. Kate had graduated from university and worked in computer-related fields. She mentioned something about IoT solutions. This kind of task was easy for her. How much time had passed? Suddenly, there was a loud noise.
Ouch! What's this?
What happened?
Something weird at the entrance.
Finally, she noticed. As I thought this, Emma's loud voice echoed.
What? A camera!
Footsteps hurriedly approached. Soon after, she burst into the living room. Finding me, she tried to fix her partially removed clothes and yelled,
"This is your doing! What is this?"
"It's a webcam."
"You were spying on us! Enough already! You're the worst!"
Emma slammed the webcam to the floor. "The worst one is you," I retorted while thinking. "If you break it, you're paying for it. It's quite expensive, you know."
Shut up! More importantly, why you are here?
"Unlike you, I live here," I answered nonchalantly. But Emma seemed infuriated by my attitude.
"That's not what I mean. You know that."
She raised her voice. I replied indifferently. "I just answered your question." "But you're prepared, aren't you?"
Eh? Why are you acting all high and mighty?
Emma screamed, and finally, Tom showed up. He looked at Emma and smirked nastily. "Ah, you were here. Mary, did you finish shopping?" "Not yet. I had to go back for my wallet, and when I did, I caught you two engaging in physical intimacy."
Peeking, huh? Nice hobby.
I can't see the humor in this situation. That's why I said to him, "Think it's funny? You do realize what happens if you cheat, right? Nothing will happen. No one's going to listen to you anyway," Tom said with a scoff. "Why do you think that?" "Because Emma is here,
and so is your mom. They're on our side.
I see. That's how it is. But this time, we have evidence. So, no matter what Mom says, it can't be overturned. Thinking this, I quietly stood up and declared to Tom,
Tom, I'm divorcing you. Just now, I got the perfect evidence. Huh? You think you can divorce? Try it if you can.
He doesn't seem to grasp the situation. Sighing, I turned to Emma.
I'll be demanding compensation from you. Compensation? From me? For being the other woman.
As I raised my voice, Emma looked sulky. Frowning, she glared at me harshly.
Don't act all high and mighty when you can't do anything. Just quietly listen to us. Sorry, but I'm an adult. I won't listen to Emma or Mom anymore.
I grabbed the wallet from the table and slipped past them, heading straight for the door. Tom followed me.
Where are you going? I'm leaving. I don't want to stay here anymore. I get it. Mary, you have someone else, right? Going to his place, aren't you?
I was astonished. What a wild imagination. Perhaps, because he was cheating, he thought I was too. Regardless, I looked at Tom sternly and retorted,
I got evidence of the cheating. There's no need for me to stay any longer.
After stating this unilaterally, I went outside.
Wait! We're not done talking. The talk is over. I'm divorcing you, Tom. We'll have a discussion later about this.
I shouted over his voice and slammed the door with force. Heading to Kate's house next. Kate lives alone, about a 30-minute drive away. Since she's not married, she might welcome me even on short notice. With that hope, I rang Kate's doorbell. Kate immediately came out. Seeing my face, she hugged me without asking why. I was so relieved that I cried without caring who saw. Once I calmed down, Kate let me into her room.
Are you okay? Have you calmed down?
Yeah.
It must have been tough. But it might be even tougher at home.
Not understanding why Kate was laughing, I asked her, "What do you mean?"
Well, actually.
Kate started to explain, barely containing her laughter. The story goes back a bit. Right after I contacted Kate, she started recording their engagement in physical intimacy. Then, Kate received a call from someone. The caller was a work contact, wanting to discuss work. After quickly finishing the work conversation, the person apparently sought personal advice from Kate. That's when Kate had a brilliant idea and did something quite bold.
This broadcast?
Yes, I recorded Mary's stream and shared it with that person too.
So, a complete stranger saw it?
Embarrassed, I covered my face with my hands. I hadn't intended to go that far. At that moment, Kate patted my back.
It wasn't a stranger I shared it with. It was your dad.
My dad?
As I asked again, Kate started laughing and explained. She works at an IoT solutions company. It's a company that solves various problems through the internet and devices. Dad was interested in IoT solutions and had been consulting with her about her company. So, it was half work, half personal. But the work talk ended quickly. Then, Dad asked about me, noticing that things weren't going well between Tom and me. Hearing this, Kate had an idea. The cause was undoubtedly him, because the evidence was right there in front of us. Thinking this, she prefaced it by showing the video.
This is what's happening right now.
Kate sends the video I was streaming to my father. My father watched the video silently. After a while, when Emma broke the camera, my father said this to Kate.
Take care of Mary if she comes.
That's all he said before cutting the communication. What happened after that, I don't know. But he probably went back home. Kate said so. At that moment, my smartphone rang. It was my father who contacted me. He said me to come back home. It was a message from my father saying, of course, I didn't want to go back home. But if my father says to come back, it means some resolution must have been reached. I'll go with you, Kate said, and that made me feel prepared. Kate and I went back home together. When we got home, Emma and Tom were being made to reflect in the living room. In front of them was my father, furious. I softly spoke to my father. Dad, I'm home.
Ah, I was waiting. These two have something they want to say to Mary.
My father stared at Emma and Tom. I'm sorry. It was all my fault. Tom deeply apologized. Emma, next to him, also apologized deeply.
I'm sorry. I won't do it again. Please forgive me.
Emma was crying, which was rare. I felt a bit relieved. What will you do, Mary? Forgive them or not? My father asked me. But the answer was already clear to me.
There's no way I can forgive them. I'm going to divorce and I'll demand compensation from both. Wait a minute. I don't have any money. That's your problem, not mine. Please, wait.
Emma began to make a fuss. But when my father scolded her, she suddenly became quiet. How could that arrogant Emma change so much while I was away? I was so surprised I couldn't continue. While I was thinking, Tom said,
Mary, please reconsider the divorce.
No.
Don't say that. Without you, I won't have a place in the company anymore.
Tom started crying. He looked like a child.
What do you mean?
I looked back at my father, who then explained while looking intently at Tom. We've been favoring him because he was Mary's husband. What will people think if that's gone?
I see.
People will think Tom messed up. That's the end of it. Of course, that doesn't mean he'll be fired from the company. But an isolated ex-husband, what happens to him is clear without saying. No one will lend a hand carelessly. Tom cried and clung to me, but there was no reason for mercy. So, I said to the crying Tom,
too bad. Maybe look for a new job? Wait. Please, let's start over. Okay? No. I've decided to divorce.
I shook off his clinging hand. The moment I did, he collapsed on the spot. After that, the video of engaging in physical intimacy became the deciding factor, and Tom and I officially divorced. Of course, with clear evidence, I could demand a hefty compensation. I also demanded compensation from Emma. She resisted, but she was powerless in front of that evidence. Most of the process was left to the lawyer. Because I had preparations for a childcare center's play and daily work. Working was actually more distracting. I was prepared for some disputes, but the divorce went surprisingly smoothly. Maybe it was thanks to the lawyer. I felt relieved. Then, one day, a parent named Ben approached me at pickup time. Mary, can I have a moment? What is it?
Recently, I've been seeing a strange person around the childcare center.
It seems there's someone watching the childcare center. Other parents are scared too. It's better for the childcare center to take action before any harm comes to the children. That's what he told me. I was just surprised. I didn't know. What does the person look like?
Like a suspicious man.
Before things get worse, I thought we should take measures. So, I immediately consulted with the principal. The principal listened to my story and consulted with the local police right away. The police promised to increase patrols. Yet, that alone wasn't enough. I worked with other caregivers to alert the parents, hoping that would make the person wary. A few days later, during pickup time, a man's loud voice came from the street in front of the child care center.
Hey! What are you doing here? Stop!
Startled, I instinctively protected the children. The principal got the children inside the building. Once the children's safety was assured, I looked out the window towards the street.
What are you doing here?
The loud voice was Ben's. He seemed to have come to pick up a child. In front of him was a person wearing a black hood, looking suspicious, holding a camera. The appearance was dubious, maybe a pervert. The principal must have thought the same and had called the police. At that moment, the man retorted to Ben.
Not really.
Hearing that voice, I was struck with realization.
That voice. Tom?
Thinking so, I strained my eyes to look at the person under the hood. A glimpse of the face visible through the hood gap was clearly Tom.
Why is he here?
By the time I thought that, I had already rushed out. Noticing me, Ben moved to shield me. At that moment, the hooded person shouted,
So you were cheating after all? Is he the one?
The hooded person, Tom, was raising his voice at me. Ben was dumbfounded by the situation. Then he quietly asked me, Do you know this person? Astonished that he was the suspicious person. Momentarily deflated, Tom raised his voice again.
That man is your affair partner.
Tom was pointing at Ben. I retorted in disbelief.
What are you talking about? This person is a parent of a child who attends the child care center. Don't lie. I heard it from your mom. Mary, you're having an affair with a parent, aren't you?
In front of me, he started to rant unilaterally. It was right after the divorce. Desperate to reconcile, Tom had consulted my mother. Then she told him, I was having an affair with a parent of a child attending the child care center. Finding that affair partner would reconcile the two of us. Their affair was just an act. She convinced him that way and promised. I was dumbfounded by how such a story came about and couldn't say anything. Then, a loud siren sounded, and several police cars arrived.
What's this? Just stay calm.
Ben caught Tom as he tried to flee in panic. Tom struggled and shouted,
Let go! Mary, do you know this person?
Ben asked again. I shook my head and answered,
Ben, you're a police officer, right? Please take this suspicious person away.
With a cold statement, he was surprised. Eventually, Tom was taken away by the police. Later, I heard he was released after receiving a warning from the police. Whether he was truly all right after that is debatable. In fact, many children started crying when he was found. Naturally, no parent would forgive this. Indeed, one parent filed a complaint against him for traumatizing their child. Whether compensation was awarded is uncertain. But it certainly added insult to injury for Tom. Seeing the situation gravely, my father fired him. He even ordered that part of the severance pay be used to compensate the parents. He could not ignore his father's command. Everything was recorded on video. Some of it was even broadcast on a video site. In the end, he had no choice but to ask for the video's removal as a condition for reconciliation. Tom, now jobless, seems to be living by working part-time jobs at night. The mother who incited Tom had a huge fight with my father. It seems she wanted to help Emma. Learning this, my father was furious. And then he said to her,
Why do you always antagonize Mary? I can't stand this anymore. We're getting a divorce.
Thus, my mother was kicked out of the house. Losing a place to go, she ended up crashing at Emma's room. But she had just quit her job because of the rumors at work about being sued for compensation due to the affair. Naturally, Emma tried to kick her out immediately. However, she wouldn't be ousted easily, because Kate had spread the story of the divorce among the relatives. Seen as the bad woman who only doted on one daughter. Among the relatives, that was my mother's reputation. And Emma, too, was labeled as the worst woman for stealing her sister's husband. With no relatives to turn to, the two had to support each other. Eventually, they decided to support each other with part-time janitorial jobs and moved into a small apartment together, so I heard. As for me, I continued working as a childcare worker. The incident with Tom had caused trouble at my workplace. Initially, I intended to quit. But I was persuaded to stay by the parents. That's why I'm still working as a childcare worker. Thinking about remarriage or dating is out of the question for now. But if a good opportunity arises, I might consider it seriously.
Mary, are you having any troubles?
No, rather I'm sorry for the inconvenience the other day.
If you ever have any troubles, I'm always here to listen. I'm single and have plenty of time.
When he said that, I felt a little happy. Maybe this is what love is, but that's a secret for now. You can walk from here to the hospital, right, Jessica? My husband Mark said this as he incredulously helped our daughter Jessica out of the car. To my surprise, my mother-in-law Sandra casually took the passenger seat, and Mark settled into the driver's. Well, that settles it. I made up with Dad. We're off to enjoy a reconciliation trip to Hawaii, just the three of us. With those words, they drove away. What just happened? I was so shocked by the abruptness of it all, I was at a loss for words.
I'm sorry.
Jessica's hoarse voice snapped me back to reality. Suddenly, nothing else mattered, and I immediately hailed a taxi to take Jessica to the hospital. That was all I could focus on. And I was burning with a rage I vowed never to quench. Mark and his mother had no idea I could take such bold action. In my heart, I swore revenge on them for disregarding our family. My name is Linda. I'm 42 years old and work as a nurse. My husband Mark is 45, just an ordinary office worker. Our daughter Jessica, just turned 10, is a quiet girl who prefers reading alone at home or during school breaks. Given my profession, I rarely mingled with the opposite sex, and I was so focused on my career that I never even attended parties. Then, just as I turned 30, a friend insisted on not going to a singles party alone because she was nervous. Though I wasn't interested, I decided to accompany her. That's where I met Mark. He laughed about prioritizing work over his personal life and somehow missing the chance to marry. I felt a strange kinship, and before I knew it, we had exchanged contact information. Talking to him, I found him to be a kind man, dedicated to his work, with a stable income. He was understanding of my irregular nursing hours, and there was no denying I was drawn to him. He felt the same. I want to know more about you, Linda. I was thrilled by those words. Thus, we began to grow closer, entering into a relationship with marriage in mind, and we got married when I was 31. Almost simultaneously with our marriage, I got pregnant with Jessica and gave birth at the age of 32. We both agreed that one child was enough, so we didn't try for more. 10 years have passed, and now, an appalling menace looms over me. One day, Mark blurted out something unexpected. Mom is coming over tomorrow. So, yeah, please take care of that. His sudden declaration of cohabitation left me reeling.
What do you mean? I'm caught off guard with your mother suddenly coming to stay.
I asked, my voice strangely high-pitched, seeking an explanation. According to him, it seemed there had been a fierce argument between his father, Daniel, and his mother, Sandra, during which Sandra declared she was leaving and began packing her bags. Naturally, the only place for her, in her 60s, to go was to her son Mark's. That's why she suddenly announced she would be coming to our house the next day. Honestly, I had always thought cohabiting, even with one's own parents, was impossible. I protested strongly.
Just because you had an argument with your father, you're coming to our house as if running away? What about our circumstances? Please, reconsider.
He seemed particularly displeased with my retort, replying with a disgruntled face.
Is living with my mom that unbearable? I never thought you could be so cold.
I couldn't bring myself to say of course it was. His expression was too intimidating. And I shrank back, swallowing the words I had almost said, instead glaring back at him. Thinking I wouldn't retort, he looked smug.
Don't bother resisting from the start. Just get the room ready for Mom to use,
he said. First of all, this house is rented, so we'd need permission from the owner or management company to add another occupant. The lease is in my name because I get a housing allowance, so naturally, it would be up to me to handle this. With 3 of us living here, one room is used by Jessica, and the other is our bedroom.
There's no spare room available under the current circumstances.
I said this, and to my amazement, he responded with a calm demeanor. Then, let's move Jessica to the living room for her studies and such. It'll also allow us to make sure she's doing her homework, and I think that's a good idea. She's still in elementary school, after all, she doesn't really need her own room. So, Jessica will be spending her time in the living room for a while. His appalling rationale made me dizzy. Why would you say something like that? Do you prioritize your mother over your own daughter?
Huh? I didn't exactly say that, but I do owe a lot to Mom for raising me. So, that's the situation,
he said as if it were the most natural thing. Despite my protests, his mind was made up. As soon as Jessica returned,
your room will be Grandma's from now on. So, start cleaning it out right away,
he told her. I rushed to intervene, but Jessica said, "It's okay," and began moving her belongings to the living room. Watching her from behind, my heart ached, and at the same time, my hatred for him seemed to swell. Lately, he had not been contributing to the household chores or finances, and his return home had been growing later and later. I had been patient because Jessica was only 10, but today's attitude seemed to make my decision clear. And the next day, as scheduled, Sandra arrived at our house in the evening and began yelling.
What is this room? Mark, are you sane? Expecting someone to live here is ridiculous.
Just as Sandra arrived, our neighbor was returning home too, casting curious glances our way, prompting me to apologize hurriedly. Upon contacting the management company, I was told that no special procedures were necessary for a short-term stay, just a report was enough. So, honestly, I was hoping Sandra could return home as soon as possible, ideally within 2 weeks. However, my wish was shattered. First, there was the large suitcase Sandra brought, indicating she planned to stay at least a month, which was disheartening. Sandra, ignoring me, entered the room unabashedly, looking around as if surveying the place. Then she opened the refrigerator without permission.
What is this? There's nothing in the fridge. Do you think Mark and your granddaughter can get any nutrition from this? Linda, you're really useless,
was her immediate criticism. I was planning to go grocery shopping today, but Sandra's sudden arrival meant I had to clean up right after work, leaving no time to shop. Should I order delivery in such cases? Lately, Mark prefers delivery over my cooking, constantly making sarcastic comments, and I've just been dealing with it. Sandra, shall we order something for delivery today? I asked, forcing a smile. Yet, Sandra complained even about this.
Huh? I won't allow delivery. A mother or wife who doesn't cook is worthless. Go shopping right now and make sure you prepare both dinner and dessert.
After saying this, she threw her purse at me and slammed the door shut. Soon, the sound of the TV blasting and Sandra's loud laughter from inside made me sigh. I couldn't even count how many times. An hour later, after shopping, I returned and was shocked to see the living room. Jessica had come home while I was out and was doing her homework in the living room, with Sandra watching over her like a demon. Whenever she made a mistake,
That's not right.
or
How can you not understand? Such a useless child. I wonder who she takes after.
she would shout. I hurriedly intervened. She just started learning this recently. Besides, elementary schools now teach foreign languages and programming. It's wrong to judge by old values. I defended her, but Sandra, uninterested in my words, said,
If only she were more like her intelligent father.
implying a derogatory view of both Jessica and me. Seeing Jessica's downcast face, I quickly reassured her. It's okay, Jessica. You just go at your own pace. While saying this, I glared sternly at Sandra. However, she wasn't listening and, upset by my retort, she started snacking on her own. Then, a week after her arrival, my frustration was about to explode. I complained to Mark.
I can't take this anymore. Do something about Sandra. It's one thing for me to be criticized, but it's unfair to Jessica.
Mark replied with an annoyed tone.
What? Don't act so high and mighty when you're getting help with the housework. It's Jessica's fault for not being able to study, right? Like her not-so-smart mother, Jessica is the real victim here.
I was furious and couldn't hold back any longer. Usually, I would end the conversation to avoid trouble, but hearing Jessica being spoken about like that hurt me as a mother. And Sandra only acted kind to me in front of Mark. When I was busy, she'd approach with a laugh. Sit down and have some tea, Linda. I'll take care of the rest. Pretending to do the housework. But in reality, doing nothing, leaving everything to me. Despite this, Mark was oblivious. Thinking Sandra was helping me. I confronted Mark with my accumulated frustrations.
So, your priority is not Jessica but your mother. You're okay with your daughter being unfairly criticized by Sandra? I couldn't stand it if my mother did that.
He taunted me with a laugh.
Yeah. Mom is always right. Well, unlike me, who graduated from college, you only finished nursing school. It's no wonder Jessica can't do well in studies or sports. Poor her.
I felt something snap inside me, but instead of getting angry,
Right, understood.
I laughed it off. A month later, Jessica, who usually wakes up early even on weekends, was still wrapped in her blanket, not getting up. When I asked her,
I feel sick.
she said. Recalling a recent outbreak at school, I checked her temperature 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Rushing to tell Mark, I found him preparing to leave. Shocked, I froze, and he said as if it were obvious. Oh, I forgot to tell you. I'm going to Hawaii with Dad and Mom. I had never heard such plans, but at that moment, I didn't care. Usually, Mark commutes by train, so the only car we have is mine. Ignoring Mark, I was about to take Jessica to the hospital open on weekends, when Mark and Sandra approached, dragging their suitcases. And then said something unbelievable. You can walk from here to the hospital, right, Jessica? Mark said this as he incredulously helped Jessica out of the car. To my surprise, Sandra casually took the passenger seat, and Mark sat down in the driver's seat. Well, that's how it is. We've made up with Daniel, so we're off to enjoy a family trip to Hawaii, just the three of us. And with those words, they drove off. Stunned by the sudden turn of events. I'm sorry. I was brought back to reality when Jessica said in a hoarse voice. Suddenly, nothing else mattered, and I immediately hailed a taxi to take Jessica to the hospital. That was all I could focus on. And I was burning with a rage I vowed never to quench. Mark and his mother had no idea I could take such bold action. I cursed them in my heart for disregarding our family like this. 2.5 hours later, my phone was buzzing persistently with calls from Mark. I didn't want to answer, but ignoring it wouldn't change anything. So, with a heavy sigh, I answered the phone. Before I could speak, Mark screamed in a voice close to a shriek.
Help me!
It turned out they had a single-car accident on the way to the airport. My car is a manual transmission. Mark had practiced driving it, but I guess he forgot how since he commutes by train. But he couldn't admit he wasn't confident driving an empty car in front of Sandra. Of course, the insurance was set up properly, covering the spouse for driving. So him driving wasn't illegal or anything. Since Mark took the car despite my objections, the accident was his own fault. While I was thinking this, Mark blurted out.
We got delayed by the accident handling, and now we're running out of time for our flight. It's your car, so you deal with it. It's all because of this hard-to-drive car. It wastes so much gas, and what's so good about this old car anyway?
His complaints sounded like the howling of a defeated dog. Having reached a point of indifference, I replied with a smirk.
So what? You knew my car was empty, right? You took it by force. The responsibility for an accident lies with the driver, not the owner. You hit a guardrail, right? Then you'll pay for the car's repairs with your own money. And, of course, for the damage to the guardrail.
With that, I hung up. The phone kept ringing persistently, but I was in the hospital. Jessica's condition was different from the epidemic, requiring further tests, which we were waiting for. I had no room to deal with such selfish people. Ignoring the calls, I then heard the notification sound for an email. Seeing that I wasn't answering the phone and had switched to messaging, I checked my mobile phone and my brows furrowed at the sender's name. I thought Mark's parents had joined forces with him, but while Sandra was desperately asking for help, Daniel's message was inquiring what had happened. Replying only to Daniel revealed a shocking truth. Daniel said, I hadn't even heard about any trip to Hawaii. I was enjoying my time with my gateball friends today. Then Sandra had called him, saying, We had an accident. Come pick us up. But she wouldn't elaborate, only saying, Just come. Thinking it was just a prank for attention, Daniel was surprised to receive a call from Mark asking for help too. Assuming that I and his granddaughter Jessica were involved, he sent a worried email. Why didn't you reply to the two of them and only messaged me? When I called Daniel to ask this, his response was unexpected. Of course. We've been separated recently. Remembering recent events makes me not want to deal with her. Did my wife cause any trouble? Daniel was unaware that she had moved into our house and thought of her antics as mere trouble. I swallowed hard and slowly explained the situation. Sandra is living in our house now. Today, she left with the family, including Daniel, claiming they were going on a peaceful family trip to Hawaii. After explaining the treatment me and Jessica received just before their departure, Daniel fell silent. After a pause, Daniel finally spoke in a voice lower than I'd ever heard.
What is that? Unforgivable.
Feeling a chill down my spine from his tone. It was 30 minutes later when the doctor finally called to inform me about Jessica's condition. It seems Jessica had acute gastroenteritis. Being told she needed to be hospitalized, I sighed with relief but also felt a strong sense of guilt for the stress I had caused her. A private room was available, so we were allowed to use it. Jessica, how are you feeling? We got a private room, so rest up. Trying to be as cheerful as possible, Jessica looked remorseful and apologized. I'm sorry. It's my fault Mom had to go through this. I'll fall behind in my studies because I'm hospitalized. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I rushed to her side and hugged her gently. I'm not raising you because you're good at studying, but because you're my precious child. Just be yourself, Jessica. Then, after Daniel arrived at the hospital, Jessica, who has always adored her grandpa, was delighted. Daniel also seemed happy, chatting away with Jessica about a painting contest she had won and how he bragged about her to his gateball friends. That's when the peaceful time was interrupted by a call from Mark and Sandra.
You didn't help us, and we missed our flight. The whole trip is wasted, and we can't get a refund. You owe us for 3 people's travel expenses.
Sandra joined in.
It was a chance to reconcile with Daniel.
She wailed. I was talking outside the hospital, but their voices were so loud that it sounded like they were on speakerphone. Then, Daniel, who had followed me, said,
I wasn't invited to any trip to Hawaii. It seems there's another person involved, but it's not Jessica, Linda, or me. Who could it be?
Neither of them expected Daniel to be present. They started to panic.
Hey, why is Dad with Linda?
His voice over the phone sounded faint, as if he had gone pale. Daniel knew they were lying and had specifically contacted me to point this out. Then Sandra began making excuses.
It was a lie that we invited Daniel. This trip was just for the 2 of us. So stop prying further.
It was as if she was begging to be suspected. I couldn't help but suppress a laugh as I retorted to Sandra's blatant lie.
No, what are you talking about? I just checked the reservation site, and it clearly says 3 people.
This left them speechless and suddenly silent. Recently, Jessica told me Sandra had been fiddling with my computer while I was away. She didn't know the details, but mentioned Hawaii searches. So, I logged into my travel booking site without much hope and found the reservation for 3, made by Sandra under my name. The payment had already been made with my credit card, as confirmed by the statement. I was the one who suffered financial damage. Yet Mark was complaining about cancellation fees. I also found evidence of the reservation for 3, prompting me to ask who the 3rd person was. Still, Mark continued to deny.
Mom must have made a mistake with the number of people. It was really supposed to be for 2.
Ah, I see. My response seemed to reassure him, who then sighed with relief.
So the trip is canceled, right? Then come to the location I'm about to tell you. We'll discuss what happens next there.
With that, I hung up. After speaking to Jessica, we left the hospital and waited at a nearby family restaurant for Daniel and the 2 to arrive. Soon after they appeared, Mark inexplicably became angry.
The guardrail damage isn't covered by compulsory insurance, so you should handle it with your insurance.
Astonished by his audacity, I snapped back.
What? You hit it. It's your fault for being careless, so you should pay for it. What nonsense are you talking about?
Glaring fiercely, Mark cringed and stepped back. Then Sandra spoke up.
That doesn't matter.
So, Linda, what's this talk about? Eager to get to the main point, I was somewhat thankful for Sandra's interjection and confirmed.
By the way, the dash cam shows that besides Mom in the passenger seat and Mark in the driver's seat, there was an unknown young woman sitting in the back.
The moment I said this, their faces contorted. My car's dashcam is quite advanced, allowing me to check live footage via a mobile app. Of course, I can also review past footage directly on my phone.
My car is quite old and valuable, so I've taken substantial security measures in case of theft. Never did I imagine that it would also serve to uncover Mark's affair. So, you lied about going with Sandra and Daniel, planning to bring your mistress instead. Thank you for leaving such clear evidence.
Contrary to my smile, their faces turned increasingly pale. They probably thought they could erase the evidence by removing the SD card. I revealed that I had been suspicious of Mark's behavior from the day I doubted his fidelity and had been looking for evidence of his affair. I had planned to confront him with a divorce once I had solid evidence, which was when Sandra started her stay. Then they left for Hawaii, and Jessica came down with a high fever. I was too busy to act, but I had been considering divorcing Mark from the start. Silent, unable to respond, Daniel, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up.
Like parent, like child. Sandra, you're silent because you're also having an affair with a younger man, aren't you?
Mark, unaware of this, looked at her in surprise. In front of everyone at the family restaurant, Sandra's face turned red as her affair was exposed.
Being seduced by a much younger man at your age and squandering money on him, and you think you're in love? Talk in your sleep.
Daniel, usually quiet, showed his deep anger. It seemed the reason she left home was related to this, ultimately her own fault. Yet she had the nerve to blame Daniel and shamelessly move into my house. I looked at Sandra with disdain.
I have no interest in meddling in your affairs. But Mark, you will definitely be divorcing me, and naturally, I will have custody. Child support and compensation are given. Plus, you'll be paying for the car repairs from the accident and the Hawaii trip expenses. And, of course, to her as well.
At that moment, Mark began apologizing profusely, not caring who was watching.
Got it, got it. I'll pay for everything. I'll pay the compensation to her too. Just don't contact her, please.
The reason I heard was astonishing. Mark's mistress appears to be the daughter of an important client at his company, and she was unaware that Mark was married. Sandra liked that the mistress came from a wealthy family and had been trying to deepen their relationship by suggesting, "Let's go on a trip together." The naive girl took her seriously and was flattering Mark for driving an old manual car. This was confirmed through the dashcam footage. Flattered by the praise, he crashed into a guardrail due to not paying attention to the road ahead. Daniel and I exchanged looks and chuckled at the absurd cause of the accident. They seemed to have parted ways with the mistress by telling her to just go home for now. And then reached out to me.
If it gets out that I was dating the president's daughter under false pretenses, I'm definitely getting fired. Please. I'll do whatever you say. Just don't tell her about it. Come on, we're husband and wife. Shouldn't you at least show some consideration in the end? I was a good husband who supported you. I think I deserve that much.
Laughing at his attitude, I responded, "All right.
I'll listen to everything you have to say, so don't come back later with 'I'm sorry, please help me' or any pathetic requests, okay? As if I'd beg like that. All right, it's settled then."
Thus, it was decided that Mark and I would divorce, and I would demand a certain amount for child support, thus ending our marriage. But the real drama began afterward.
What do you mean? She found out about the affair.
Some time after the divorce, Mark called me in agony. I realized I had forgotten to block his number, as he continued to complain.
This is the worst. The president insists on apologizing to you, and he's furious at me. You broke the promise not to tell her, so give me back the money now.
As I listened to Mark's rant, I wondered why I ever married such a person. Then, I decided to reveal a truth he hadn't anticipated. You know I'm a car enthusiast, right? And the president you mentioned runs an auto parts manufacturing company. I've been a regular customer there. I had your accident car repaired there. By chance, your mistress saw the car, screamed, and everything was exposed.
See? I didn't break any promise. Is that so?
Realizing this, Mark groaned. His mistress was a hard-working apprentice mechanic at her father's company. It was natural for her to be shocked when a woman unknown to her brought in the car her boyfriend had damaged for repairs. When asked, I simply stated the truth. My husband, well, ex-husband, crashed the car into a guardrail. The car is registered in my name, so I brought it in for repairs. The mistress guessed the rest, explained the situation to her father, and from there, the story reached his company. Her father was furious, saying, "What kind of upbringing allows a man to target my daughter while he has a wife?
Am I going to lose everything? Kicked out of my home, no money, estranged by my dad, and only my troublesome mom left. Now I'm losing my job too."
But it was all his own doing.
If you had lived decently, this wouldn't have happened. Your actions are to blame. Take care, and don't ever contact me again.
I made my point clear and hung up, ensuring to block his number this time, severing all ties with him for good. After some time, I received notification that my car had been repaired, and reluctantly, I learned about his current situation. Apparently, he was indeed fired from his company. Not just for misconduct, but also because it was discovered he had been embezzling company funds. Though offered the option to return the money for a mere demotion, Mark, burdened by a significant debt after paying me, had no such luxury. Thus, he left the company unceremoniously. Sandra remained wholly dependent on Mark. Given her age in the 60s, it wasn't feasible to force her to work, and with no money, they had no choice but to take care of each other at home. Now, they are cramped together in a cheap studio apartment. Naturally, Sandra and Daniel divorced, agreeing to Daniel's condition of no alimony in exchange for not pursuing compensation. However, this left them in severe poverty. Despite trying to save every day, Mark couldn't resist when Sandra ordered expensive delivery food, leading to a dispute that involved the police. Eventually, Sandra started working, taking a part-time job at a convenience store a few days a week. It's pitiful she has to work at her age, but in Sandra's case, it was a clear case of reaping what she sowed, garnering no sympathy. Though I've divorced Mark, my daily life continues as usual. I had been the primary breadwinner, and Jessica and I continued living in our home, so there was no change in our living environment. Interestingly, Jessica's grades improved slightly after being freed from his nagging, especially as she entered middle school, where her art grades were exceptional, expressing a desire to pursue an artistic career. As a parent, I simply respect my child's choices, no matter how challenging the path. There's no harm in letting her pursue her interests to her heart's content.
Look! I won first place in the contest again. That's amazing. Jessica, you truly have a talent for art.
I report our current situation like this during visits to Daniel, now in a facility. Though no longer my father-in-law post-divorce, we've continued interacting through Jessica. I'm endlessly grateful to Daniel for believing in me over his wife or son. I hope he lives a long and fulfilling life. only what's for the family. When my daughter Grace said that, she pushed the steak away from me. At the same time, my son-in-law Robert started walking towards me. "Here, take this," Robert said, placing a package of instant ramen in front of me. The soup from inside spilled all over the table due to his rough handling.
Huh?
Seeing my puzzled look, Robert and Grace couldn't help but burst into laughter.
Did you really think you'd be eating the same thing as us? How shameless can this old lady be?
Their laughter made it harder and harder for me to breathe. It seemed I had reached my limit. I crouched down on the spot, gasping for breath. Then, someone put their arm around my shoulder. "Let's go home." Tentatively, I looked up to see it was undoubtedly my husband, Thomas.
"Aren't we family? Did you say she isn't part of the family?"
The anger in his voice was something I had never heard before, freezing everyone in place. "My name is Chloe. I am a 48-year-old housewife. I married Thomas 5 years ago and have since been living my days as a housewife. This is because he runs his own company and we are financially comfortable. But it wasn't just for financial reasons that I stopped working. When I met Thomas, I was working as a tutor at a cram school that his daughter Grace attended. Grace was in middle school at the time, and despite attending cram school, her grades were not notably good. We were not school teachers, just cram school tutors. Children spend very little time at cram school compared to school. Because of this, my fellow tutors didn't seem to take our responsibility too seriously. Getting too involved could lead to trouble. There were also quite a few parents who would complain about various things, so their behavior was somewhat understandable. At that time, I didn't know anything about her family situation. I just thought she was a student who hated studying. The students I taught were relatively good performers, which made me even more concerned about Grace. Feeling it was unfair to the parents paying high tuition fees without seeing results, I called in Thomas, a parent. I discussed Grace's efforts at the cram school and asked about her home environment. That's when I first learned that Grace didn't have a mother. I wondered if her lack of interest in studying was related to her circumstances. I started communicating frequently with Thomas to improve Grace's grades. Seeing my dedication, he asked me out. The idea of dating a student's father was unimaginable to me. Although I politely declined his offer, we continued to be good friends. Eventually, Grace successfully got into high school, and when I left the cram school, he asked me out again. Touched by his long-standing feelings for me, I accepted his proposal. Having a teenage daughter, Grace, was a significant obstacle, but I eventually accepted his marriage proposal as well. I was over 40, but it wasn't a decision made out of desperation. I truly loved Thomas from the bottom of my heart. The fact that he had a child did not bother me at all. Thomas was a wonderful man. He was considerate of my feelings and hesitations, thinking thoroughly about Grace as well. I knew I would never meet such a wonderful person again in my life. When I accepted his marriage proposal, Thomas finally opened up about his work. He revealed that he was the owner of a company. I was surprised by this fact, but I understood why Thomas had not mentioned it earlier. Given Grace's presence, he must have felt the need to be cautious. However, Thomas being the president of a company didn't change anything between us. He suggested I quit my job, thinking of me, which I gratefully accepted. Having always dreamed of being a housewife since I was single till now. I also thought this decision would positively affect Grace, who had been living without a mom till now. Our relationship transitioned from student and tutor to parent and child. Though there would be challenges, I believed we could manage them well. I was at the pinnacle of happiness, harboring such sweet thoughts. But things did not go as smoothly as I had hoped. For Grace, her former tutor becoming her mom was a fact not easily accepted. It is natural that I could not accept this fact so easily. If our meeting had occurred when she was a bit younger, perhaps things might have been different. But we met during Grace's sensitive middle school years. Some classmates who also attended the cram school probably knew about my marriage to Thomas. I haven't heard from her about being teased regarding our relationship, but it's clear she isn't pleased about others knowing. For various reasons, Grace never warmed up to me. Though our relationship as tutor and student wasn't exactly close, it was better than now. She has never acknowledged me as her mom, creating a tense atmosphere at home. Sorry for leaving you to handle everything at home, Chloe. Are you sure you're not struggling with Grace? Sensing the tension, Thomas showed concern for me.
Thanks. It's a difficult period, and there seem to be some misunderstandings, but I'm sure we'll build our relationship over time.
While I appreciated Thomas's concern, I knew I had to overcome this challenge myself. I had anticipated such difficulties since the start of our relationship. When I told my parents about my relationship with Thomas, who has a stepchild, they were strongly opposed. They warned it wasn't just about us, and if things went south, it could deeply hurt Grace. They even tearfully spoke about how hard it might be for me. Eventually, my parents understood my sincere intentions, but their concerns turned out to be true. Though I felt down daily and wanted to seek help, I refrained from voicing my troubles. It must be no problem. I kept telling myself it would be all right and faced each day with grace. Grace, now in high school, barely opened up even to her biological dad, Thomas. Naturally, she disliked communicating with me and clearly avoided me. Grace, can we talk? Maybe it wasn't good for me to keep worrying. Thinking this, I decided to have a heart-to-heart conversation with Grace and called out to her. Noticing my call, Grace stopped midway up the stairs. But when she turned around, her eyes were filled with hostility.
What? Don't pretend to be a mom when you're nothing but a stranger.
I was taken aback by her unexpected words and found myself at a loss for words. Then, catching a glimpse of my momentary confusion and shock, she smirked maliciously.
You're just after Dad's money, aren't you? How disgusting. Don't talk to me so casually.
With those words, she stomped up the stairs and disappeared. Was I married to Thomas for his wealth? Did Grace truly believe that? Until now, such a thought had never crossed my mind. Considering it, Grace's perspective might seem natural. However, confronting me directly with such accusations was a different matter. This was a clear violation of the rules. But discussing this with Thomas would undoubtedly shock him. I didn't want to see him saddened. I forced myself to swallow the exchange I had with Grace earlier and decided to wait a bit longer. Since the day I heard Grace's hidden feelings, the wall between us has undoubtedly thickened. To be honest, I'm scared of Grace. What will she say the next time I try to speak to her? The thought makes it hard for me even to attempt talking to her. The more I pressure myself, the more I panic. Ironically, the more I try to bridge our relationship, the farther it seems to get. Tomorrow, I'll speak to her, tomorrow for sure. Such thoughts continued for days, months, years. By now, irretrievable time has passed. I know I should have consulted Thomas earlier. I should have opened up about my true feelings instead of acting tough. But the more I think about it, the more confused I become. What if he blames me for the strained relationship with Grace? What if he dislikes me for being so pathetic? What if I'm branded a failure as Grace's mom and he leaves me? These worries have been suffocating me, and I've been carrying them alone. Before I knew it, Grace had graduated from college and became a PA. I'm aware that in today's world, it's common not to secure a full-time position and that many young people work in non-regular employment. However, I felt responsible. If I had communicated more frequently, could Grace's future have been different? Perhaps my various concerns negatively impacted Grace, leading to this outcome. Overwhelmed by regret and anxiety, I finally reached my limit one day. While preparing dinner as usual, I was suddenly struck by severe dizziness. Accompanied by a headache so intense I couldn't stand, I collapsed. The dishes on the table crashed to the floor, and the food fell on me. Covered in the meal I had made, I somehow managed to grab my cell phone. Feeling my life was in danger, I called an ambulance and was subsequently hospitalized. After some tests, I was diagnosed with a condition caused by stress and fatigue and was ordered to rest completely. Upon hearing from the hospital, Thomas rushed over from work, and I couldn't help but cry.
Thankfully, there's nothing life-threatening. But you need to rest completely here. Also, if you have any worries or troubles, I want you to talk to me.
Thomas spoke to me gently as I cried. Unable to hold back any longer, I opened up about my relationship with Grace. All the conflict and regret I had been harboring, my responsibilities as a mom. Thomas listened intently to my story, nodding sympathetically. After I finished, he hugged me on the bed and spoke.
I'm really sorry for making you bear this alone.
The issue with Grace isn't your fault, Chloe, it's mine. Don't worry, just focus on resting for now. While I was resting, Thomas spent a long time talking with Grace. He understood her struggles with having a new mom, but also pointed out that some things should never be said. After facing Grace, Thomas told me,
if Grace doesn't change now, there's nothing more we can do. It's not about giving up, but I have plans, so don't worry.
I trusted Thomas's words and tried to behave as naturally as possible from then on. I didn't feel a dramatic improvement in my relationship with Grace, but I believe she stopped being harsh to me as before. And so, the days went by until Grace was set to marry. Her partner was a man named Robert, 4 years older than her. Robert worked in the food and beverage industry and was the manager at Grace's part-time job. Though he looked a bit frivolous, he didn't seem like a bad person. After a few meetings, the two of them successfully registered their marriage. Thomas and I were delighted and celebrated their new beginning. Naturally, Grace would leave this house to live with Robert. Currently, we're renting a small apartment, but we plan to build a house eventually. I wonder if Robert earns quite well despite his youth. While pondering such carefree thoughts, I couldn't help but wish for the young couple's happiness. However, the situation gradually started to look dubious from that conversation onward.
Soon, we're thinking of building a house, but could we borrow some money for the down payment?
Grace asked us during her visit alone. Apparently, Robert has savings for their new home, but using most of it now seemed risky to them. The housing company had set a higher than expected down payment, and they were at a loss.
Wouldn't it be troublesome if we end up with zero savings when we have children?
Grace laid out a seemingly reasonable explanation to Thomas. Thomas couldn't refuse Grace's request.
I'll lend you the money this time, but live within your means. There's no need for Robert to rush, he's still young.
I felt a bit uneasy about Thomas's decision, but it wasn't my place to say anything. Grace appeared overly pleased with Thomas's response, thanking him exaggeratedly before leaving to report back to Robert. Perhaps Thomas noticed my dissatisfaction, as he then placed his hand on my shoulder and said,
"Don't worry, it won't inconvenience you. I'll make decisions while keeping an eye on things."
I could only nod silently to Thomas's words. Months later, Grace and Robert's new home was completed. The construction was quick, and as soon as Thomas agreed to help financially, Robert immediately proceeded with the new house's contract. When the house was finished, Grace contacted Thomas to celebrate the completion with a meal. Thomas, showing me some photos attached to Grace's message, said cheerfully,
"It's amazing how such a fine house can be built in such a short time. You haven't talked much with Robert, have you, Chloe? Despite everything, maybe this is a good chance to have a proper chat with Grace."
To be honest, I'm still scared of Grace. The feelings that sprouted on that day towards her, who was supposed to be my daughter, have not faded. Yet, I couldn't possibly spoil this joyous occasion. You're right. They look so happy together in this photo, I replied, observing Thomas's joyful expression while desperately hiding my fear. Everything will be fine. She must have changed, having Robert as her partner. Despite everything, we are a family, as Thomas said. With him by my side, there's nothing to worry about. I reassured myself and awaited the promised day. On the day of our meeting with Grace and her family.
"Shall we get going?"
Prompted by Thomas, I snapped back to reality. As the day approached, I found myself unable to sleep well. Frightened at the prospect of meeting Grace again. Thomas seemed unaware of my anxiety, as he made no mention of it. I forced a smile, trying to maintain composure. I dressed as usual, applied my usual makeup, and got into the car. As we neared Grace's house, panic threatened to overwhelm me.
"It's okay. If it gets too much, we can always leave."
Thomas spoke without turning from the steering wheel. I was momentarily puzzled by his words. After a moment, I grasped the meaning behind Thomas's words. He had noticed my suffering. And he understood that I faced today despite that suffering. Leaving the decision up to me. If I had said I didn't want to go, we wouldn't have forced the issue of attending the housewarming, nor would he have been upset with my decision. Thank you. I'm not sure how much I was saved by Thomas's words, but I managed to reply with as much calm as I could muster. Suddenly, I felt embarrassed, as if my fear of Grace had been transparent all along. We didn't speak much more on the way to Grace's house. As we entered the residential area, Thomas announced our arrival.
"Here we are."
Looking out the window, I saw a brand new house. We got out of the car and rang the bell of Grace and Robert's new home. "Just a second, I'll open the door." Grace responded from the doorbell at Thomas's call. My heartbeat accelerated uncontrollably. Could Thomas hear it beside me? I was that nervous. A moment later, Grace appeared through the crack of the door. "Welcome, we've been waiting for you." As Grace opened the door to greet us, Thomas placed his hand on my shoulder. Though he said nothing, his gesture conveyed his support. Encouraged by Thomas, I followed him inside. Robert was waiting behind Grace. As Thomas had mentioned, I hadn't really spoken much with Robert. "Please, come in." Feeling somewhat out of place, I followed Thomas into the house. Touring the new, luxurious two-story home with a large backyard. I hadn't asked for details, but Thomas must have arranged a significant amount for them. While Thomas and the couple laughed and toured the house, I merely nodded along. Grace and Robert acted as if I didn't exist, avoiding eye contact.
"Let's eat some food first."
Led by Grace to the kitchen, I saw steaks, likely ordered in, spread across the table. "Oh, this looks delicious. You didn't have to go to all this trouble." I sat down beside Thomas, admiring the lavish steaks laid out on the table. "Just wait." Grace, noticing my gaze at the table's offerings, exclaimed, "Only what's for the family." With that, Grace pushed the steak away from me. At the same time, Robert approached me.
"Here, take this,"
Robert said, placing instant ramen in front of me. So roughly that the soup spilled onto the table.
"What?"
I exclaimed in surprise. Unable to contain themselves, Robert and Grace burst into laughter.
"Did you really think you'd be eating the same thing as us?"
How shameless can this lady be? Their laughter made it increasingly difficult to breathe. It seemed I had reached my limit. Crouching down, gasping for breath, someone placed a hand on my shoulder.
Let's go home.
Looking up fearfully, it was undoubtedly Thomas. Yeah. Thomas gently supported me as I slowly stood up, conveying a different tone than the whisper he had shared with me earlier.
Aren't we family? Did you say she isn't part of the family? Grace, Robert, you both know this is no joke.
Thomas's icy tone made me tense. This is the first time Thomas has sounded so cold. After seating me, Thomas glared at Robert and Grace, continuing.
Grace, I'm deeply disappointed. As your father, I'm sad and embarrassed. Just as you said, you're no longer family.
Grace looked incredulous at Thomas's words.
Robert, I'm also disappointed in you as well. Don't ever show your face to us again. And I'm not so generous as to lend money to strangers. Return the money I loaned for this house to my account within a week. If there's any delay, I'll go to the police.
Without giving Robert a chance to interject, Thomas stated firmly. Wait a minute. That's unreasonable. We can't possibly do that. Robert protested, but Thomas immediately countered.
I'm already being unreasonable by lending such a large amount to a stranger like you.
Thomas's raised voice left Robert frozen.
He is right. How can I trust someone who calls me a stranger? Surely, you didn't borrow money without a plan to repay it?
Angered by Thomas's words, my irritation grew. Chloe, I'm really sorry. Let's leave now. Anger evident in Thomas's tone. I followed him out of the house. Thomas's firm stance left me speechless with surprise. As the car started, Thomas sighed deeply and began to speak. I was wrong. I'm really sorry for putting you through that. Are you hungry? Let's start over and grab something to eat together. After apologizing to me repeatedly, Thomas drove us to a place he said had delicious steak. I just nodded, unable to say anything. The steakhouse we arrived at looked fancy from the outside. Sensing my mixed feelings, Thomas quietly continued to eat his steak without making a fuss. The steak was as delicious as Thomas had said, and I was surprised at myself for being able to enjoy it after being so shocked earlier. Watching me eat, Thomas smiled contentedly. Gradually, I became more at ease, and could confidently say that he would never betray me. When we got home, Thomas's cell phone had a ton of missed calls, all from Robert and Grace. Thomas called Robert to give him the account details for the debt repayment.
My mind won't change. I don't plan to interfere with Grace now that she's a stranger to us, but someone with your immature thoughts can't possibly run their own store. Give up your foolish dream and pay off your debt.
After delivering that message, Thomas hung up. I did what I could for now. Still, I've really put you through a lot, haven't I? I had thought that Thomas's earlier actions weren't his true feelings. However, it turned out that everything he said was sincere. The decision to cut ties with Grace and to have Robert repay the money lent for their new house was unwavering. As his wife, I was happy, but I couldn't wholeheartedly celebrate cutting off ties with our own daughter.
Grace is an adult now. She made her choices and led herself to this outcome. Perhaps you can somewhat agree with this reasoning. It's for her sake, too.
Moved by Thomas's actions, I found myself tearing up. He gently smiled and embraced me. The phone call to Robert seemed to have been the final straw, prompting Grace to come to our house that day. Grace always acted confident in front of me, but now there was no sign of that confidence. Her expression was filled with panic and confusion.
Dad, please, let me talk.
Although I let Grace into the house, Thomas refused to speak with her at all. I almost ended up saying, "At least let her talk," due to Thomas's stubbornness. Unable to stand seeing Grace cry in front of us, Thomas finally spoke up.
Did you come here alone? Where's Robert?
Relieved by Thomas's words, Grace managed to speak through her sobs.
Dad said never to show my face again.
Thomas sighed deeply and continued.
Do you have any idea how much pain Mom has gone through because of you? Dad has been lenient until now. But what you did today is absolutely unforgivable.
Tears streamed down Grace's face as she remained silent, looking down.
Sure, you and Mom might not be blood related. But even so, what has Mom ever done to you? Has she ever treated you like you weren't her own? Has she not shown you love?
Tears started to fill Thomas's eyes as well.
Mom has been patient all this time, and that's why we've managed to keep going. But it's over now. If I had to choose between you and Mom, I wouldn't hesitate to choose Mom.
I was taken aback by his words. Thomas loved me that deeply.
What you do with Robert from here on out is up to you. We're not going to forgive you guys. Understand? Then you should leave for today.
Thomas stood up as if to say the conversation was over. Grace desperately tried to stop him, but it was futile. Not knowing what else to say to Grace, I followed Thomas. For a while, I could hear Grace's sobbing from the room. But eventually, Grace must have given up, realizing there was no point in staying any longer, and quietly left the house. She would probably never return to this house again. In the end, Grace had been deceived by Robert. Robert had counted on Thomas's money to open his own shop. It seemed he started dating Grace just for fun, but decided to marry her once he found out her dad was wealthy. Now cut off by Thomas and burdened with a huge debt, he had no reason to stay with Grace. Angry about our confrontation, Robert took out all his frustrations on Grace. Grace must have been shocked to learn that he never truly loved her. Without waiting for Grace's response, Robert forcefully ended their marriage. Fearing that Thomas might actually call the police, Robert desperately gathered money and even took on more debt from various places. Of course, he immediately sold the new house to pay off his debts. It's none of our business anymore, but opening his own shop is now a distant dream. Robert ruined himself by trying to use others. Ironically, Grace had thought I married Thomas for his money. I never had such thoughts, but Grace clung to her belief. However, she ended up being deceived by a man after money herself. It's easy to say she lacked judgment, but the irony of the situation left me stunned. Thomas had no intention of forgiving Grace, who continued to insult me, and coldly pushed her away each time she begged for forgiveness. The biggest shock for her was probably that her real dad chose me, a stranger, over her. Despite the insults, she must have thought that in the end, her biological father would choose his own daughter. It's a natural assumption, but Thomas didn't do that. The betrayal by her real dad cast a dark shadow over her life. Losing both Thomas and her home, Grace had no choice but to start taking day jobs. The fact that she lost her familial support will probably haunt her for the rest of her life. After Grace left, Thomas became even more appreciative of our time together. Though he never said it, the heartache of disowning his biological daughter, Grace, must be substantial. But Thomas chose to cut off even his parent-child relationship to choose me. Despite the many hardships and painful moments, being with Thomas has been truly worthwhile. The only regret is not being more honest about my feelings sooner. Had I done so, perhaps a different future awaited us? I sometimes think that way, But Thomas has never blamed me for my past actions. I used to think that raising a stepchild meant always putting the child first. It might be the norm, but I was truly fortunate. While cherishing Grace, he ultimately weighed his relationship with me as an individual. Cherishing the value of his decision, I am living happily.